All right, guys, coming to you live from frigid Minnesota here at CAD Technology Center. It's a pleasure to have all of you here with us today. Um, as Nate said, we are going to discuss and demonstrate some um, issues and techniques that are workflow related issues and techniques that will make your lighting practices in Revit a bit easier, more successful, and more efficient. The main things I want to talk to you about today are reference planes, spaces, filters, and family clearance, and how these can all be configured and leveraged. And we'll give some little demonstrations and walk you through how you might do these, use these elements to, again, make your Revit experience a little smoother and make it a more successful process. So the first thing I want to go through here, the first thing I want to discuss is using reference planes. I generally prefer to place my light fixtures, my ceiling-based light fixtures on reference planes and not on architectural ceilings for numerous reasons. I think it's just a smoother process, and I think I like the fact that I have more control over where my light fixtures are and how they're going to react or not react to any changes that the architect makes in the building design process. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to one of my elevation views here, and you can see I've already placed a reference plane for some first floor lighting fixtures. I've already got some lighting fixtures placed on that reference plane. A couple things that I want to talk about reference planes regarding placing lighting fixtures on the reference planes as opposed to ceilings. First thing, when you are creating a reference plane, always give that reference plane a name and make sure that you keep that name nice and short and very descriptive. So you can see I've got one reference plane on my first floor here, and that reference plane I've named it first floor, and I've got this reference plane dimensioned at 9 feet 6 inches. So I've gone ahead and included that dimension in the name, that distance from the floor or that offset, so that when I go to place light fixtures on this reference plane, I know exactly where those light fixtures should be. The second thing I want to discuss about placing reference planes in your model is it is very important that your reference planes all get placed in the same manner. So what I mean by this is I'm going to go ahead and create another reference plane here, and I'm going to create this reference plane from right to left, and then I'm going to create another reference plane here, only this time I'm going to create that reference plane from left to right. So when you're creating reference planes, these reference planes essentially have a polarity to them. So for instance, this reference plane that I created from right to left, and actually while I'm doing this, I'm going to go ahead and name these at the same time so that we have names on these reference planes, and I will name them accordingly, right to left, left to right. So when I place this reference plane from right to left, we could say, for instance, that there's a positive value to the top of this reference plane and there's a negative value to the bottom of this reference plane. And to the contrary, when I place this reference plane from left to right, that polarity relationship gets reversed. So if it was positive on the top and negative on the bottom with our right to left reference plane, with our left to right reference plane is going to be positive on the bottom and negative on the top. And where this is important is when we go to place our light fixtures, they abide by that polarity. So the light fixtures will be either on the top of the reference plane or on the bottom of the reference plane, according to which direction they were created. So I'm going to go ahead and place a light fixture here once to demonstrate this. I'll place on a work plane, and I'm going to go ahead and select my left to right. And then I'm going to go ahead and select my right to left. And I will go into my section view here to show you what I'm talking about. So again, on my right to left reference plane, my light fixture is showing up as it should be on the top side of this reference plane, as opposed to my left to right reference plane. My light fixture is showing up upside down in relation to these other light fixtures. And what this all comes down to essentially is the manner in which these families are built. Hopefully your family content has been built in a consistent manner so that if you place your reference planes consistently, you can expect consistent results out of those light fixtures. So in this case, we would want to make sure that all of our reference planes were placed right to left. Now, one other thing I want to show you with these ceiling light fixture reference planes is there's only one way to know the manner in which these light fixtures, or excuse me, there's only one way to know the manner in which these reference planes were created, and that is when you click on the reference plane, you will see the name that you've given that reference plane on one end of the reference plane or the other. So for instance, when I created the reference plane from right to left, I see the name of the reference plane over on the far left here. Same with this right to left reference plane, where with my left to right reference plane, we see that name on the right side. So this is how you would be able to tell which direction these reference planes were created in. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these reference planes and light fixtures, and we will move on. I do want to discuss a little bit about using reference planes in plan view for the same reasons that one would use reference planes for your ceiling-based light fixtures. A lot of people have asked me if they should use reference planes for their wall-based fixtures. It's kind of a different animal simply because within your model, you're going to have significantly more walls than you are ceilings. So this is just a much larger thing to manage and a much larger undertaking. But again, I've had people ask me about this, so I have gone ahead and demonstrated how they might do this. So one workflow that I have shown some clients or developed with some clients is kind of the idea that you see right here, where I've got a little pocket of reference planes here with fixtures on them, electrical fixtures, one for each wall in this room. And what we would do then is we would just grab this little set of fixtures and reference planes, and you can just kind of run them around your project and drop one in each room, like so. So what you would do in this workflow then is you could go ahead and use your align command and align these reference planes to these walls, and you can even go ahead and lock them if you want. So at this point, you're kind of mimicking a hosted element to that wall, and then if we want to add more fixtures or relocate these fixtures, we can go ahead and move them up and down this reference plane all we want, or we can copy up and down this reference plane all we want. And we can go ahead and change these fixtures if we want, so on and so forth. You can see how this would kind of be how you would use reference planes in a plan view situation. One situation where you definitely would want to use a workflow such as this is if you're working with a CAD background or if you're working with a PDF background. So in this view, we don't have our architectural Revit link at all. This is a CAD background that you see right here. And I can't even place an electrical fixture onto this wall because it's a CAD wall. It's not a Revit wall. But what I can do again is use the same workflow. I'm able to align to that CAD background, so I can go ahead and align our reference planes again to these walls. Go ahead and lock them even if I want, and you can see how this would be a very significantly smoother workflow, or significantly more enhanced workflow to place fixtures on your walls when you're dealing with CAD backgrounds. The next thing I want to kind of talk about here is spaces, setting up spaces in your model and just kind of proper configuration of the model or the spaces to get the most out of them. And then also a little trick that I like to use with my spaces and space tags just to make my life a lot easier. I'm going to go into a section view here again and take a look at our space itself. Now if I select this space in this room, we can see that we are not getting any average estimated illumination values into this space from our light fixtures. We can also see pretty clearly that the space itself does not fully propagate up to our next floor, or the space doesn't fully isn't fully propagating the extents of this room, which is why we're not getting any values from our light fixtures into this space. So I'm going to go into visibility graphics here and go to our light fixtures category, and I'm going to turn on the light source for these light fixtures. So now you can see pretty clearly that this light source is not fully populating this space, and it appears to me that it's about the middle point of this light source that needs to make contact with this space to propagate this space with our illumination calculation values. So with this space selected, I'm going to go ahead and change our constraints to make it so that these values will propagate. What I want to do is I want to change our upper limit from level 1, the level that we're currently on, to level 2, the level above. And then I'm going to change our limit offset from 8 feet to 0 feet. So what this is going to do, you'll see the space now fully propagates this room that it's in, and you can also see that now our light fixtures are propagating data into this space. So when you're placing your spaces, you're going to want to make sure that these values are set while you're placing them. So again, I'll change the same constraints values up here on our option bar, change it from level 1 to level 2, and change that offset to 0. So now if I were to place my spaces, they would just be created properly right off the bat. Unfortunately, I have already placed my spaces in this project, and all of them are incorrectly, the constraints are set incorrectly in all of them. But what we can do is we can just go ahead and select all our spaces and go back and fix it after the fact. Again, I'll just select my spaces, and I would change my constraints here. One other thing I do want to show you regarding this before I do that is another piece of, or another aspect of not having your spaces set up properly is you're not even going to get a count in that space with your light fixtures. So we can see that in my space 6 here, I'm counting 6 light fixtures, but other than that, I'm not showing any light fixtures in any spaces on a fixture count schedule. So I'll go back to my lighting plan here. And you'll see that when I go ahead and change these spaces, fix the constraints on these spaces, that my lighting fixture schedule will then be populated with the spaces showing a fixture count. So again, I'm going to change this upper limit to the level above. I'm going to have our limit offset set to 0, and as soon as I apply that, you'll see that now every space that has a light fixture is showing a proper count in that space. And lastly, what I want to show you about spaces is you'll notice that all of our spaces have space names: space 6, space 7, space 8. That's not what we want. There's a really easy way to fix that, and it's called the space naming utility. This is a tool that if you're a subscription customer, you can go ahead and download it free from the Autodesk app, Autodesk Exchange. What you're going to want to do is just go ahead and search for Revit space naming utility. Your first hit in Google is going to be the Exchange website. You can go here and download this application for free, install it. And basically what this tool does, I'm going to go ahead and run it now. It's going to dive into your architectural linked model and allow you to grab the names and numbers from the rooms and attach them to the space name and number parameters in your spaces. And there we go. So now you can see we have properly named and numbered spaces for this project. One thing to note on this is that this is not a live linked tool. It's basically grabbing a snapshot of that architectural linked model. So if your architects decide to go ahead and start changing some names and numbers of their rooms, it's not going to update automatically in your model. You'll actually have to run the space naming utility again to pick up those changes. And I lied, actually, there was one other thing I wanted to show you about spaces that I think is an incredibly useful little trick. You might notice that when you're placing light fixtures or when you're working your model, you're constantly trying to avoid selecting your space or your space tags or both. For instance, if I wanted to copy this bank of lights here, I have to go ahead and unselect that space tag, which just is annoying. Or if I want to try and place something on this wall, I'm constantly trying to avoid these spaces. What we can do is we can just go ahead and select all of our spaces and all of our space tags. And then we can go ahead and pin those down. Then what this allows us to do is we have our selection options over here, and I can uncheck our select pinned elements box, and now I don't have to worry about accidentally selecting any of these spaces or space tags. To me, this is a pretty profound little trick that just makes working in Revit significantly easier. So the next thing I want to talk about here is adding clearance to a light fixture family. So I'm going to kind of walk you through in a real simple manner how you might go about doing that. I'm going to go ahead and open a family here. What I have is a little clearance box family. It's just a generic model family. As you can see, basically just an extruded cube with some object styles applied to it. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up this out of the box plane recessed lighting fixture family, edit that family. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and load this clearance family into that lighting fixture family. What we're going to do is we're going to create a nested clearance family, or excuse me, we're going to place a nested clearance family into our lighting fixture family. So I'm going to go to one of our elevation views here, and I'm going to go ahead and hide this extrusion, get that out of the way. And you can see that our light source is at the top here, so this is what's going to be shining down into the room. We want the clearance actually on the bottom of this window, which would be the top of our light fixtures. So move this down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the type of this clearance instance of this clearance family right here and associate some of these dimensional parameters to the same dimensional parameters in our light fixture. So I want to go ahead and associate our width parameter in the clearance family to the width parameter in the light fixture family. I want to associate this depth parameter to the length parameter in the light fixture family. And this is I only know that I need to associate depth to length because I was playing around within this family and kind of mapped out these the different names for kind of the same, what are essentially the same dimensions across the families. And then for our height parameter, I'm going to go ahead and add a parameter because I want the user to be able to define what the height of this clearance is going to be for this specific light fixture. So I'm going to call this parameter clearance height. I'm going to leave it as a type parameter, as a common length and dimensions parameter. I'll go ahead and hit OK, and we'll set that up. And then lastly, I just need to align and lock some of these reference planes to my clearance family. There we go. And that should be well enough. Go back to our 3D view here. Oops, I need to get that other side aligned and locked. I'll see if I can find the correct view to do it in. There we go. And there we go. Oops, I think I forgot to lock that alignment, so I will do that again. I'm just going to hide this line here so I can make sure that I'm aligning my light fixture. That looks good. And I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and load this into our project, and we'll take a look at it. Hopefully everything worked out. I'll go back to a section view here, and I'm going to swap out this light fixture here for the clearance light fixture that we just created. And that looks like it worked to me. If I edit the type of this light fixture, I will be able to set this clearance height. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and swap out this other light fixture here as well. So we can see that when I edit on the one family, I'll change it to 6 inches. It's going to change it across the board for all types of that light fixture. Further, what I just want to show you is if you decide that you don't want to see the clearance in these families, the way that I've got it set up right now is I would go into my visibility graphics, I would go to generic models, and under generic models, since that clearance box is a generic model family category, we've got this clearance subcategory. When that clearance box was created, it was created as a clearance subcategory. The object style was created as a clearance subcategory, so that's why we see this subcategory under generic models. So I'll go ahead and uncheck that box, and now we don't see that clearance anymore. And further, I wanted to point out that these clearance boxes are, because they are 3D modeled extrusions, these are these clearance boxes will be able to, you'll be able to run Clash against them, whether you're doing your Clash in Navisworks or you're doing your Clash right inside of Revit. You will be able to use these clearance boxes to do that Clash, which is a very useful feature. I know a lot of people are very happy to be able to do that. And obviously this process of placing this clearance, nested clearance box family into your lighting fixture, this is something that can be applied to essentially any family and certainly is not exclusive just to your light fixtures. Okay, taking a look at some of our questions here. We got a question, are you hosting the lighting on the reference plane or ceiling? All of these light fixtures, as you can see, are hosted directly to our reference planes. Then again, there's a lot of reasons why I prefer to do that, mainly just because I like to have control over exactly where these light fixtures are placed. I know that a lot of architects prefer to um, delete ceilings and recreate ceilings as opposed to just moving ceilings, which can kind of wreak havoc on my hosted light fixtures that are on these ceilings. Um, and no, I do not. Sorry, I'm answering no to a question that I'm reading that I haven't actually said. There's another question: is the idea to have the reference planes locked to the ceilings? Then, no. I mean, you certainly could do that if you wanted to. Um, I guess the workflow that I prefer to use is if I'll just kind of assess the model and figure out where my architects are placing their ceilings, what these ceiling heights are at, and I will just create a reference plane for each ceiling height. So, if I've got a 9'6" ceiling, I've got this reference plane taken care of. Maybe I've got a 9-foot ceiling, so I can just go ahead and create another reference plane, set that reference plane to 9 feet, lock that down, make sure that I give this reference plane a proper name, which in this case would be first 9 foot 0 inches. Excuse me, I believe was the nomenclature that we were using. And I would just create a series of reference planes for each level, for each um, ceiling height that I am anticipating on that level. And again, you might really want to dial it in and get exactly to the architect's ceiling height and to every ceiling height that they're showing, or you might just be kind of taking it a little loosely and not getting to that level of detail. A teacher of mine once told me that we're not building watches here. That would be where I would apply that statement. Another question, I'd like to have pendant lights hang straight down from the slope ceiling, but be hosted to the slope. That is something that would be dependent on how the family was built and what um, family category it was, I believe. I can look into this a little further. This is something that I was just dealing with recently. And unfortunately, if your family is built in a manner that doesn't hang straight down, um, when you're hosting it to a slope ceiling, really the only way to fix that is to completely rebuild the family. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube on that one, the proverbial toothpaste. And in that case, what you're looking at doing essentially is setting up a reference plane for each point on that slope ceiling that you want to hang a light from. Does unchecking that modify the clearance to panel clearance too? I think you're asking that if you uncheck that clearance subcategory in your visibility graphics, will that also shut off the clearance you might have on your excuse me, on your panels? Yes and no. That it would if you are using the same exact clearance family that has that same clearance subcategory applied to it, then yes. Any family that is under that subcategory would then be turned off visibly in that view. And if you didn't want that to happen, what you might want to do is go back and create a clearance box and a clearance box family and assign that family to a panel clearance subcategory, and then copy that family and assign this new copy to a lighting clearance subcategory, and so on and so forth. If you want to kind of bring it to a more granularized approach, that might be how you would do that. Few more questions here. Can you change the reference plane polarity. That I'm not sure of. I don't think that you can. I think I've tried this before and have not had any luck. If I rotate this 180 degrees, let's see what happens. See that, oops, I did not give this a name. So let's call that test. And it looks like it actually did work. So yeah, if you rotate your reference plane, you can swap out that polarity. Now, if you have already placed anything on that reference plane, you might be in some trouble. And that's kind of where the problems come in, and that's why you want to make sure that you create these reference planes correctly right at the beginning. And the reason for that is obviously when you're in plan view and you're placing your light fixtures, there's nothing to show me whether this light fixture is upside down or not. They're going to look the same either way, and so you might easily lay out an entire floor of light fixtures or an entire portion of that floor on that specific reference plane, and you wouldn't even know until you happen to look at it in section view, and at that point you can't just grab that reference plane and rotate it. You can actually flip the fixture around. So when I select my fixture and I click on this flip work plane command here, this is actually rotating that fixture. If I look at this in section view here, you'll see what I'm talking about. Oops, close that, close that. There we go. So when I click on this command here, you'll see that my light fixture is flipping from the top of that reference plane to the bottom of that reference plane. But what you're also seeing is that when I'm doing this, the light fixture isn't flipping across a middle point in the light fixture. It's actually flipping, I believe, from the bottom edge here, so that while it is flipping it, it is also relocating it. So you can kind of save yourself if you get into a situation where you're working on a reference plane with incorrect polarity, but it's not a full solution, or it's not a full save. You're still going to have a lot of cleanup to do.